Well, welcome to another episode of Women in Politics Independence Day. I'm Jaynie Morris, your host, and it's my absolute pleasure to have your company once and again because I know from all the feedback that I've been getting and the emails and the texts and everything that you're actually loving our podcast series where we are shining lights on women who are standing up for the election 2022 in Australia as independents and saying, I'm not going to say enough is enough because that gets said all the time, but what they're actually doing is they're standing up and saying, hey, it's time for us to have a seat at the decision-making table and really get what Australia needs now. So it's my absolute pleasure and delight to introduce you to my guest on this episode. Now, she's no stranger. She's been in my sister company, Sheroes Unlimited. She's been the cover girl on a magazine in 2021, where we shone a light on her then, as she is a writer and an author. She's a Walkley Award winner. She's a media commentator who is never shy of saying exactly what she feels needs to be said. She's a very passionate woman. She's a very passionate grandmother as well. And she is running for the election 2022 in May in Australia for a Senate seat as a candidate. And we're delighted to have you with us again, Jane Caro. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, Jane, as I mentioned, you're no stranger to my parent company, Sheroes Unlimited, and of course, we're transforming now together, being our guest today. I invited you on because for several reasons, not least of which is that your message and what you're standing for and what you're going to be doing once you get into Canberra, which we know you will, are going to do. But also because the decision that you've made to run in this election, you have chosen a party that not many people have heard of, Reason Australia. So why did you choose them and why did you choose to run, Jane?
Okay, well, to be fair to Reason, I think they chose me a bit more than I chose them. Basically, I suppose the trajectory of it is growing distress, I think I'd say, with the direction the country's taking and with the calibre of people who've been leading our country for the last decade. We keep electing governments that don't believe in government, and it's not working. So we've been spinning our wheels, really, for a decade. We're not going anywhere. In fact, I think we're sliding backwards. So that was a growing distress, and particularly about climate change. You said I'm a passionate grandmother. You know, I look at my grandchildren and I just worry. I worry what kind of a world I'm going to be leaving to them. Will they have a livable environment? What's going to happen? Are we going to be able to grow enough food? You know, the science is terrifying, and yet we have leaders who just no, nothing to see. I just can't believe it. I cannot credit it. So there was that. And so then in just before the 2019 election, that I was talking to some people about Warringah, which was the seat that Tony Abbott held at the time and now is held by the independent Zali Steggall. Between us both, we mutually agreed that I wasn't the right candidate for that seat, and that made sense to me as well. And I'm glad because Zali's an excellent member, and she, of course, won the seat from Tony Abbott. So that decision was right on both our parts. But it sort of got me thinking. But I didn't really go any further with it. I was a dual citizen, British Australian, and as you know, that has disenfranchised a great many Australians from standing for office. I think it's been a bit of a mistake, really, but anyway. So I sort of just wondered. And then I got a phone call from Reason Australia, and they talked to me about possibly running for the Senate. And I looked into them. And in fact, Reason has a longer history than most Australians know. Victorians are much more familiar with the party. It actually has been around there for a long time. Fiona Patten, who some of your listeners may know, may be familiar with, is the one member that Reason currently have in a parliament. She is in the upper house in Victoria. She originally was elected as the head of the Sex Party, But a few years ago, the Sex Party and Voluntary Euthanasia Party joined together to form Reason. And so now Fiona is the head of the Reason Party. And I was interested in Reason because I've always admired Fiona. She's an incredibly effective legislator as a representative of a minor party. She's the list of her achievements, the last of which was only a month, maybe a little more than that ago, where she was very instrumental in Victoria in getting sex work decriminalised. She's done heaps of that kind of thing. Also very involved in, of course, voluntary assisted dying being legalised in Victoria and in other parts of Australia as well. So she gives the proof that one person can make a big difference, because she does. And I also really was attracted to Reason because it is an evidence-based party. It's interested in evidence-based policy. I know you'd think that this was common. It isn't. And it's also a secular party. It basically says we are interested in what's the problem we're trying to solve. What does the evidence say we should do to solve that? What do the experts who are working in that particular area, who know all about it, researched it, spent their life working with it, what do they say is the right thing to do? How would that work in terms of minimising harm, maximising and enhancing people's lives, making lives better, and reducing misery and bad effects? Right, okay, well, let's do that, shall we? Not influenced by any ideology or belief, including religious belief. So it's basically about staring reality in the face and making the decisions that make sense given that reality. And I was very attracted to that. And I think in a way that's what we've been lacking in our political discussions. It's often been ideology or obfuscation or trying to dog whistle or gaslight or leverage this set of fears, this set of emotions, instead of applying that thing that human beings have on this planet anyway, better than any other creature, our ability to reason, to think, and to make sensible decisions. So I found that all very attractive. I read their policies and I thought, yes, basically I agree with all of those. I did get them to strengthen their public education policy a little bit, but basically I was in lockstep with them. And so I thought, all right, Jane, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. And I think it was partly looking at my grandchildren and thinking, I've got to have done everything that I can do to get us moving in the right direction, moving forwards instead of slipping slowly backwards. Because I think the Conservative parties and the governments we've had in the last decade have basically been trying to tell Australians a really awful and fundamental falsehood, and that is you can just stay the same. You can't stay the same. Nothing in life stays the same. You can either shrink or grow. And if we keep going in the same way we're going now, we'll shrink. That's all we can do, because we're back. It's backwards looking. It's clinging to old ways of doing things. It's refusing to look forwards. The only way you can grow is to be prepared to risk change, to doing things differently, to actually making progress. And it struck me that this was a pivotal election, a really pivotal election. I shudder to think what will happen. I don't know. I have no crystal ball. I can't tell you, and I won't predict. But if we choose to shrink, that will be tragic, and it will be very hard for us to. And we will eventually. I'm hopeful be able to turn that around, but it'll cost us a lot more, and it'll be a lot harder. And I'm not sure we'll ever get to where we could get to if we decide to grow. And so that's why I decided now was the time. Zoe Daniel, who's standing as an independent in Goldstein, says it brilliantly. She says, if not me, who? If not now, when? Yes, I agree.
I think it's really interesting where you've highlighted when you were explaining to us there, Jane, in regards to reason and how they're structured, what their policies, their policy base from where they come from and what have you. All of those elements that you were sharing, to me as a listener right then, I was thinking, well, isn't that what governments are supposed to do anyway? However, you're right. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but well, actually, I'll ask you a question. Do you think we as a society, and we'll just talk about Australia because that's where we're at, right? Do you think we as a society have become so complacent with all the different rhetoric that's come through that actually has, dare I say it, a marketing spin on it, to keep us in a level so that when politicians of the major parties come out and use just three words like jobs, 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 or economy, 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 that's playing down to us to a complacency level, which makes us think that all the things that you've just said that reason stands for, which the major parties don't actually, is not highlighted. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think what's happened is the political parties that are seeking to take office and run the country, which is not what Reason is trying to do.
No.
I will pay them due respect. That's a much harder road to hoe. I get that. And what they're doing is playing to people's emotions rather than to their intellect. And in a way, I probably, if I was advising them, I would be telling them that that's what they need to do. Because in the end, every purchase decision is made emotionally, and a vote is a purchase decision. We then post-rationalise that purchase decision. That's how human beings work. And I'm appealing to your emotions when I say I'm about reason, I'm about thinking, because that appeals to people who think, oh yes, I'm so sick and tired of feeling manipulated, of feeling spun to, of feeling fobbed off or patronized or gaslit. I think what's happened is that the spinning and the marketing has gone too far. So it's become everything. And that actually doesn't work terribly well. We know, for example, from all the polls and the research that's been done, that the biggest single thing that's worrying Australians at the moment in this election is not climate change, even though that's right up there. It's not growing inequality. It's not even the cost of living, although that's quite an interesting one. It's actually integrity in politics, a federal ICAC, and corruption. Now, I think that's because they know they're being constantly lied to and fed only what the people seeking office think they want to hear, rather than the truth, rather than being, if you like, leveled with. The best doctors don't sugarcoat their diagnosis. They treat you as an intelligent human being and they level with you, even if the news is very bad. And I think in a way that's what we're searching for. That's what we're talking about when we talk about we're concerned about integrity, because we feel like no one's telling us the truth. And that makes us feel very scared. Because if you don't know what the truth is, it's a very murky world in which you're operating and you don't know how to make. That's why the fake news thing, the Trump, the right-wing demagogues, they hate the truth. That's why they obfuscate the truth all the time. They throw up smoke screens around it. When people seed doubt about climate change, it's not settled yet, the science isn't settled, that's what they're doing. They're murkying on purpose, deliberately, to stop you knowing what the facts are and being able to make an informed decision. And finally, I think we've got to the point we're going, I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't know what to believe. I don't know, blah, 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 because we've murkied it up so much. So my argument now is a really black and white one. If you are concerned about integrity, if you are concerned about a federal ICAC, if you are concerned about corruption in government, there's only one thing to do. You have to vote this government out. And the reason I say that is, with the rorts, the scandals, the giving tenders without competitive pitch to companies that operate out of tin sheds, and giving jobs to mates, on huge salaries, and giving, setting people up to run the COVID crisis cabinet who run fossil fuel companies. With all of that going on, right, if you decide, I hate the corruption, but I'm going to vote for them because I'm a bit scared, I don't know Anthony Albanese, what you're saying to them is, go ahead, keep doing that. You're rewarding it. And you're not only doing it for this government, you're doing it for every subsequent government. You're basically saying you can get away with a whole lot of shit with Australians. We will vote you back in anyway.
Yes.
So I'm being absolutely black and white here. I'm not arguing that the Labor Party is, purer than the driven snow or anything else. But I am saying if you are worried about integrity in government, there's only one thing you can do, and it's not vote for the current government.
I think that's COVID really fractured all sides of politics. I think it really opened it up and showed, especially the Australian community, exactly what is going on there in regards to their actions on all levels of how they actually supported Australia as a community throughout all of that. The rise of the independence, which is what we're all about at Women in Politics, the Independence Day podcast series, the rise and the rapid rise of women putting their hands up and I'll use the word courageously.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm sure you'd agree with me, Jane, that and you've just highlighted it beautifully. It's a dirty place over there in Canberra. Especially for women. In particular. However, the courageous women that have put up their hands and said, no, we're running as independents and we're going for it because we have to make these changes. We have to be pivotal and instrumental in doing this. Can I ask you this question that we've been asked as well, is that there is a massive section of the community that is 100% behind this and can see, pardon the pun, the reasoning behind doing that. There's another section of the community that is hearing these stories about, if you vote them in, then, it's going to be a hung parliament and nothing's ever going to get done. How do you answer that?
Well, the most effective parliament or government to date in recent times, in terms of getting legislation through and things done, was the Gillard government, which was a hung parliament. Germany, New Zealand always have a hung parliament, or often do, because of the way their election system works. They get heaps of things done. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think if we want to get anything done, we are going to have new voices, fresh voices. And I think one of the reason that women, I'm standing for a small party because I'm standing for the Senate, and you cannot get above the line on the ballot paper unless you are a registered party with over 1,500 paid up members. And my view was it's going to be wonderful if we get a number of the independents up in the lower house, and so they can pull whichever government to doing things on climate change, equality, women's safety, all the things that they're talking about, integrity, etc. That's great. But if we have a Senate which is dominated by United Australia Party, Paul Hansen's One Nation, and is really reactionary and conservative, nothing will happen. Nothing will change. So in fact, it's not a hung parliament that will stop things happening. A hung parliament will probably get things happening because the independents will insist on things happening if they're going to guarantee supply to whichever of the two other parties forms a government. So they will have a lot of bargaining power. But if that won't achieve, and that will create change if the Senate is also able to pass progressive legislation, particularly on things like climate change and equality. So again, this idea, they're doing it, they're murkying the facts, they're painting a picture which is actually obscuring what would, and historically there's evidence, Gillard's government, many governments around the world that operate routinely with negotiated governments where there is no out-and-out majority. It's a very common model in democracy and works perfectly well most places. So, the evidence says this is not a problem. And in fact, if we look at all our parliaments for the last 10 years after Gillard, they did bloody bugger all. So, except give an awful lot of money to already rich people. That's about it.
Yeah.
And, so I would argue the evidence says that is a false fear.
Good. Good answer. Thank you for that. Thank you. Jane, what gives you hope for the future?
Women, women and other marginalised groups. I am so knocked out by, as the word you use, the courage of women who have finally got in touch with their anger. I think as a result of #MeToo in 2017, women finally felt that anger, expressed that anger. They took their anger, which used to be turned inward against ourselves, which is a wonderful way of keeping us quiet, afraid, ashamed, depressed. We took that anger and went, hang on, I didn't do anything. I was just born a woman, and some guy decided to assault me, harass me, humiliate me, molest me, whatever it was. And they turned it outwards and said, this shame doesn't belong to me. This shame belongs to you bastards who did it, not me. I didn't do anything. That's been energizing. That's been empowering. That's been really behind, I think, the rise of the independents. You can draw a direct line, I think, between the 100,000 women who marched just over a year ago all around Australia and the independents standing now, and the huge numbers of people, both men and women, but an awful lot of women who are supporting them so loudly. It's also why, guess who isn't talking about it much at all? Mainstream media and our political leaders. Really interesting. But I think that the courage of those women who've got in touch with their anger and want to do something to make the world a better place, but also LGBTQI Australians who are under attack at the moment, yet again. It seems that too many people on the right of politics seem to want every election to take a group and demonise them. We've seen it with Vietnamese people coming after the Vietnam War, boat people in general. We've seen it with Muslim Australians, African Australians. We've seen it with so many different groups that we've decided, oh, we'll demonise, we'll say they're the problem, they're the bad guys. And now it's transgender Australians for some bizarre reason. And let me tell you, every time people have been selected out as a group and demonised, we can think of a famous example last century, it has never turned out well. Not ever. That never turns out well. It's always a bad idea. So I'm lost in admiration for the courage of LGBTQI people who are refusing to take a backward step, for people with a disability who are speaking up for themselves, and the death of 1,000 cuts that's happening to the NDIS at the moment, and the terrible time their carers are having. I'm really inspired by the courage of teachers who are about to go on strike in New South Wales because of what's going on in terms of their pay, their working conditions, the amount of admin they have to do, and the rapidly shrinking workforce for all those reasons, which is making it even harder. For nurses, for aged care workers, early childhood educators, all those people who are being ignored, discounted, underpaid, overworked, who kept us going, retail workers, courier drivers, who kept us going, AMBOs, kept us going during COVID, and are now being told, oh, you're not important, piss off, we don't care about you. I don't think people are taking that anymore. I just don't think they're prepared to put up with it anymore. But our politicians haven't sussed that. They're still running the same, and the political gallery, you know, the Canberra gallery, they're still running a political campaign the way they've always done it, as if nothing has changed. And it just strikes me that there's a huge disconnect. And I don't know what's going to happen in the election, but I tell you what, really interested to see how this plays out.
My team and I were talking about that the other day, and the general consensus is that the teal movement is going to make political history, and which is made up primarily of women. As well. And the comment that you just made then in regards to, you know, the wheels are they're the same, especially in this election and what have you. That was a comment that was brought up by actually my production assistant the other day. She said, you know, Jaynie, I was flicking through doing some research the other day for our upcoming Women in Politics podcast. And she said, I came across some advertising that was in the last federal election. And she said, it's pretty much the even the music's a little bit the same. Like it's the same. Now granted, you know, I mean, Kelly's not a woman over 50. She's in her 30s, and she was going like the reason she was saying that was like has it always been like that, Jaynie? Should I do some more research and go back even further and further and see if it's the same thing? And I said, you don't even have to do the research. I think you'll find that it is. And I think that speaks to what you just said as well, Jane. The upcoming election, you're running, as you said, you're in the Senate. The Senate, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Senate really is the gatekeeper. It is the main decision-making table for all legislation that affects Australians, as well. How are you when you win and you walk through those hallowed halls there in Canberra? How do you feel that your first 3 months are going to be like?
Well, it'll be a steep learning curve. I'm not unaware of that.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to the most to begin with?
I'm looking forward to learning a lot more. You know, finding out. I'm looking forward to all of that. But I'm also looking forward to being able to look at the workings of our Senate. I might take a leaf from Paul Keating's book. When he first went into Parliament, he went and talked to the clerk of the Parliament, the people who actually have been there for donkey's years and know how it works, and said, tell me about it, educate me about this. And I think that's a really nice way to begin. I also have always thought that the best way to do anything is when you start is not to get in there and spout your own mouth off, but go around and have a talk to and listen to the people who are experienced and are already there, and learn. So that's one of the things that I'll be doing. I also hope that when I come to look at legislation and decide how to cast my vote, if I'm lucky enough to have the privilege of being in that position, that I will think about it in a number of some simple ways. The first is, who will this legislation, what's the point of this legislation? Why are we doing it? What problem are we trying to solve? Will it do that? Like if it says it's going to mitigate carbon, will it? And ask the people who know. If it will, who will it harm? How much will it harm them? What will be the consequences if we don't do it to them? Will they be harm more? Sometimes that can happen. Who will it help? And how much will it help them? And, you know, what will be the consequences for them if we don't do it? And really cast that lens across it. And if it's going to solve, or at least partially solve, the problem that it's designed, like it has a point, because sometimes I think legislation doesn't appear to have, like, what's it for? What are you trying to do here? If it has a point, it looks like it might have some positive effect on that point, that it will minimize harm for people and it will actually enhance some people's life, then I will be very favorably disposed towards that legislation. If it doesn't do any of those things, or is going to harm particularly vulnerable Australians, if the cost of it will impose itself most on those who can least afford to bear it, no, I'm not interested. Not interested. Redesign your legislation. You know, if people who can afford to bear some of that cost, it impacts on them, well, as long as that's fair and across the board for them, I'm more interested in looking at it.
Jane, it's going to be an incredible history-making election in May in 2022, not least of which for the reason that courageous women just like yourself have put your hand up and said, we want a seat at that decision-making table.
We can't do worse, can we, Jaynie? The people who are already there. We can't do it any worse. I keep saying the bar is low. So let's just get in there and make it a little bit better would be a big improvement.
Exactly. And on that point then, Jane, if you had an 8-year-old Jane sitting in front of you right now, what advice would you give her for her future?
It's all going to be okay. Stop worrying. Don't try to fit in. Waste of time trying to fit in. You're never going to fit in. But guess what? That's awesome. Who wants to fit in? Be yourself.
That's great advice, and I would suggest that that's what we'll see when you land in Canberra as well. Jane Caro, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as our guest on Women in Politics Independence Day podcast. We wish you all the best. You're an incredible woman, and aside from, or not aside, but equally important, you are an author, and I can't let you go without mentioning your latest book, The Mother, which has just been released as well. Congratulations on that. It's a great read.
Thank you very much. Can I just say one quick thing? If you are, any listeners, you are in New South Wales, anywhere in New South Wales, you can vote for me. A lot of people are not aware that the Senate is for the whole state, not a particular seat. So if you're in New South Wales, you can vote for me.
That's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely, because you are in the Senate. And having said that, all of your contact details for how people can find out more about you and how they can help volunteer and be a part of you.
Yes, please. We need all that.
What now? Just tell us what the website is again.
It's Jane Caro. So that's Caro, Jane Caro, 4, reason, the usual way you spell reason.com.au. So Jane Caro, 4, reason.com.au. Everything's there.
Fantastic. Jane, all the best. Looking forward to, now I know you'll be very busy once you get into Canberra, but I would like to extend the invitation that perhaps a few months down the track, we'd love to have you back on the program so you can tell us what it's like over there and how things are going.
Well, if I'm privileged enough to win, I will certainly do that without any hesitation. I would look forward to it.
Fantastic. Congratulations, Jane, and thank you again for being our guest on Women in Politics.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I have enjoyed, I am loving bringing Women in Politics Independence Day podcast to you. We're getting such great feedback, so I know you're loving all of these interviews. If you've missed any, well, just subscribe. Go to jayniemorris.com, go to the podcast section, subscribe there, and you can catch up on all the other episodes of Women in Politics. But remember to like and share. Make sure you share these podcasts so that we can help spread the word of these incredible women who are running as independents in the May 2022 Australian election. All of the contact details for Jane are below where you're watching or listening to this podcast right now. So make sure you go to her website, Jane Caro, 4, reason.com.au. Check out what she's doing, where she's going to be, how you can support her, especially if you're in New South Wales, and volunteer as well. And let's help these independents make history in politics in Australia. I'm Jaynie Morris. It's my absolute pleasure of having your company again for our Women in Politics Independence Day podcast. And until next time, wherever you are in this beautiful, amazing world of ours, I hope you have an absolutely fabulous day.